Humanity has been fed a comfortable, neatly packaged lie for nearly 5,000 years. The narrative is constantly repeated in every school textbook, every mainstream television documentary, and every standard museum exhibit across the globe. We are told that Pharaoh Khufu, a Bronze Age monarch driven by supreme ego, ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza as his personal eternal resting place. The Orthodox story insists that thousands of conscripted agricultural laborers, working in rotating shifts over a mere 20-year window, managed to quarry, transport, and perfectly assemble 3 million massive stone blocks. Their entire technological arsenal supposedly consisted of nothing more than soft primitive copper chisels, heavy diorite pounding stones, hemp ropes, wooden rollers, and sheer physical determination. On paper, it sounds like an inspiring testament to human willpower. But when you move past the academic consensus and look at the hard, physical reality of the Giza Plateau, the traditional explanation completely falls apart. Practically everything you have ever been taught about these monuments is not rooted in undeniable physical proof, but rather in highly fragile, decades-old, educated guesses. What if the real history of human civilization is not a linear march from primitive cavemen to modern engineers? What if an entire chapter of our collective past has been systematically erased, ignored, or deliberately hidden from the public eye? At the very center of this historical suppression stands a single, highly controversial figure, Dr. Ziawas, the long-standing gatekeeper of Egyptology. For over 3 decades, this one individual has maintained an absolute, iron-fisted monopoly over every square inch of Egypt's sands. No independent researcher can dig, no advanced scientific team can scan, and no hidden chamber can be opened without his direct, personal authorization. The moment an independent discovery threatens the official timeline, the gates are slammed shut. Groundbreaking research is abruptly halted. Alternative theories are publicly ridiculed, and independent minds are barred from the sites. Mainstream archaeology behaves less like an objective scientific pursuit and more like a protective corporate entity safeguarding a valuable intellectual property. But why? Why fight so fiercely to suppress alternative exploration? What is so dangerous about questioning the age of a stone monument? The truth is, if the public ever realizes that the Great Pyramid cannot be replicated using primitive tools, the entire foundation of modern anthropology collapses. Tonight, we are stripping away academic propaganda and conducting a deep, unfiltered dive into the physical evidence that has left open-minded scientists, engineers, and independent thinkers completely speechless. From hidden, pressurized void seal for millennia to precision stonework that defies the capabilities of modern industrial machinery, the real story of the Giza Plateau is far older, far stranger, and infinitely more sophisticated than mainstream academia will ever dare to admit. To truly understand the depth of this historical cover-up, we must first look at the staggering lack of direct evidence tying Pharaoh Khufu to the Great Pyramid. Ancient Egyptians were notorious bureaucrats and obsessive record keepers. They meticulously documented the most mundane aspects of daily life, from grain taxes and local court disputes to the exact number of cattle sacrificed in religious rituals. Their temple walls are covered in thousands of square feet of highly detailed hieroglyphic inscriptions celebrating the military triumphs and architectural achievements of their rulers. Yet, when it comes to the single largest, most complex, and most architecturally perfect monument ever constructed on the face of the earth, the contemporary record is completely silent. There is not a single official inscription, stela, or papyrus from the 4th dynasty that explicitly states Khufu designed or built the Great Pyramid. The entire Orthodox attribution rests almost entirely on a highly suspicious event that occurred in 1837. An English explorer named Colonel Richard Howard Vyse, desperate to justify the massive financial backing of his excavations, claimed to have discovered faint red ochre graffiti deep inside the tiny, low-ceiling relief chambers directly above the king's chamber. These marks, known as the Khufu quarry marks, contain the name of the pharaoh. However, independent analysis of Vyse's personal journals and the strange linguistic anomalies within the graffiti itself suggest a highly plausible case of 19th century forgery. The hieroglyphs were written using a bizarre mix of styles from completely different historical eras, and some symbols were even written upside down or incorrectly based on the standard writing guide available during Vyse's time. Vyse was under extreme pressure. His funds were running out, His rivals were making massive discoveries elsewhere, and he needed a spectacular find to secure his legacy. Finding the name of Khufu in a chamber that had been sealed since the dawn of time was the perfect solution. But even if we assume the marks are authentic, the presence of a ruler's name on a structure does not automatically equal authorship. Throughout history, monarchs have consistently carved their names onto existing ancient monuments to claim them for their own dynasty's practice known as usurpation. Ramses II was famous for erasing the cartouches of his predecessors and replacing them with his own, effectively stealing credit for temples he merely repaired. Why do we assume Khufu did not do the exact same thing with the Giza Plateau? To completely shatter the orthodox timeline, we must examine an artifact that mainstream Egyptologists hate to discuss: the inventory stela. Discovered in 1858 by the father of Egyptian archaeology, Auguste Mariette, this limestone monument was found in the ruins of the Temple of Isis, right next to the Great Pyramid. The text on the stela dates to the 21st dynasty, but it explicitly states that it is a direct copy of an incredibly ancient text from the time of Khufu himself. What does this ancient text say? It clearly states that Pharaoh Khufu did not build the Great Pyramid. Instead, it claims that the pyramid was already standing as a house of Isis, the mistress of the pyramid, long before Khufu ever took the throne. The inscription goes on to say that Khufu merely performed restoration work on the monument and built a small temple for himself nearby. It also mentions that the Great Sphinx was already standing, heavily weathered, and buried in sand during Khufu's reign. This is a devastating piece of historical evidence written by the ancient Egyptians themselves. Yet, how does mainstream archaeology handle this direct written testimony? They completely dismiss it as a work of historical fiction. They claim that the priests of the 21st dynasty simply made up the story to elevate the status of their temple. Think about profound hypocrisy of this academic stance. When a faint upside-down piece of graffiti is found by a desperate British explorer in a dark hole, it is accepted as absolute, unshakable historical gospel. But when an official stone stele is unearthed by an esteemed archaeologist, explicitly stating that the pyramids are older than Khufu, it is instantly thrown into the trash bin of academia as a dynamic lie. This is not science. This is a deliberate curation of history to protect an established narrative. The mystery deepens significantly when we analyze the sheer internal layout of the Great Pyramid, which stands in stark contrast to every other verified tomb in Egyptian history. If you visit the Valley of the Kings or any standard Old Kingdom mastaba, you are immediately confronted with an explosion of religious art. The walls are deeply carved with scenes from the Book of the Dead, intended to safely guide the soul of the pharaoh to the treacherous underworld. They are packed with sacred spells, elaborate offerings, and beautiful painted murals showing the king interacted with the gods Anubis, Osiris, and Ra. The Great Pyramid, however, is a masterpiece of absolute, stark minimalism. Its grand interior passages and massive stone chambers contain absolutely zero decorations, zero religious spells, and zero royal iconography. It is completely sterile, designed with mathematical and geometric precision rather than religious devotion. Furthermore, when the Arab Caliph Al-Ma'mun violently forced his way into the king's chamber in the year 820 AD, expecting to find unimaginable golden treasures, royal jewelry, and a mummified body, he found the room completely empty. The great lidless granite box, which mainstream archaeology labels a sarcophagus, was totally bare. There was no trace of a mummy, no broken pieces of a royal wooden coffin, no remnants of funerary linens, and no precious grave goods whatsoever. The standard academic response to this glaring absence is to blame grave robbers. But the physical evidence refutes this entirely. The original, hidden entrance to the pyramid was still completely sealed and unknown to the world until Al-Ma'mun's workers literally blasted their own tunnel to the solid limestone using fire and cold vinegar. If grave robbers had somehow entered before him, they would have had to navigate through hundreds of feet of tightly fitted granite plug blocks that completely choked the ascending passage, a feat that required modern gunpowder and heavy tools to bypass. The pyramid was not broken into. It was sealed from the inside. This raises a massive, uncomfortable question that mainstream Egyptology refuses to address. If the Great Pyramid contains no body, no treasures, and no religious art, why are we still blindly accepting the claim that it was built as a simple tomb? Let us delve deeper into the mathematical reality of the tomb theory. If the Great Pyramid was constructed purely to house a dead king, it represents the most structurally inefficient and illogical architectural design in the history of the world. 99% of the monument consists of completely solid stone, completely inaccessible to any human being or priest performing funerary rites. The internal volume of all the known chambers and passages combined occupies less than 1% of the entire 7 million ton mass of the structure. In a standard Egyptian tomb, the focus is entirely on creating large subterranean spaces or vast chambers to house the monumental amounts of physical wealth, furniture, chariots, clothing, and foodstuff that the pharaoh would require in the afterlife. King Tutankhamun, a minor ruler who reigned for less than a decade, required multiple rooms packed to the absolute ceiling with gold and artifacts to satisfy his funerary needs. Khufu, who supposedly ruled a far more powerful and wealthy empire during the absolute peak of the Old Kingdom, would have logically required a burial treasure thousands of times larger than Tutankhamun's. Where would this treasure be placed? The king's chamber is a small, rectangular room that could not hold a fraction of a standard royal burial assemblage. The access tunnels leading up to the chamber are so narrow and restricted that large ceremonial furniture, golden chariots, and massive structural canopies could never physically pass through them. This means that if the pyramid was a tomb, the pharaoh was buried without any of the essential spiritual gear demanded by the state religion. This structural paradox indicates that the entire premise of mainstream Egyptology is fundamentally flawed. To extend the examination of dynastic records further, consider the complete absence of Khufu's personal identity within the immediate Giza administrative context. While the tombs of his high-ranking court officials, family members, and priests are filled with texts referring to their roles under his administration, none of these peripheral documents mention the construction logistics of the Great Pyramid itself. The royal decrees found elsewhere dealing with minor temple construction projects or mineral mining expeditions completely dwarf any documentation regarding Giza. We have a highly organized bureaucracy that counted every single copper tool issued to miners in the Sinai Peninsula, yet there's a total structural blackout regarding the distribution of resources for the single greatest civil engineering project in the ancient world. If an ancient kingdom mobilizes its entire GDP for 2 decades, the administrative paperwork doesn't just vanish while leaving minor tax receipts untouched. The dynastic Egyptians did not write about building the pyramid because they simply did not build it. They inherited an ancient megalithic infrastructure that was already embedded into the bedrock of the plateau. To truly grasp the technological impossibility of the orthodox construction timeline, we must look at the project from an advanced engineering perspective. The Great Pyramid is composed of an estimated 2.3 million blocks of dense limestone and igneous granite, weighing anywhere from 2.5 tons to an astronomical 80 tons each. To assemble this colossal mountain of stone in just 20 years, as the history books claim, the builders would have had to cut perfectly square, transport, lift, and precisely place one massive stone block every 2 minutes, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, without a single moment of rest. This is an absolute logistical impossibility for an agrarian society relying on primitive hand tools. Think about the workforce required. Mainstream historians suggest a rotating crew of 100,000 men. Where did they sleep? How were they fed? The Giza Plateau would have required a sanitation and food supply network that rivals a modern metropolis. To move millions of blocks up an ever-expanding construction ramp will create an unprecedented logistical bottleneck. If you use a single ramp, it will have to be over a mile long just to maintain a safe, manageable incline to reach the top layers of the pyramid. Constructing such a ramp will require more stone and material than the actual pyramid itself. If you use a spiral ramp wrapping around the monument, you completely block the ability of the surveyors to check the alignment and angles of the corners, leading to a structural twist that would cause the pyramid to collapse inward long before completion. Consider the sheer geography of the construction site. While the bulk of the core limestone was quarried locally on the Giza Plateau, the massive structural granite blocks used to build the king's chamber and its overhead stress relief ceilings had to be transported from the ancient quarries of Aswan. Aswan is located over 500 miles south of Giza. This means that 80-ton blocks of solid, igneous granite had to be cleanly detached from the bedrock, rolled down to the Nile River, loaded onto fragile wooden barges, floated 500 miles downstream, unloaded, and then hauled up the steep incline of the Giza Plateau. Even with modern heavy industrial cranes, specialized multi-axle transport vehicles, and computer-guided logistical software, moving a single 80-ton block over that distance would take weeks of intense preparation and execution. Yet, we are expected to believe that ancient humans accomplished this thousands of times over, using nothing but ropes woven from papyrus and wooden sledges slid across wet mud. If a single wooden roller or sledge cracked under an 80-ton load, the entire team of workers would be crushed instantly and the block would be lost. The sheer physical physics of friction and weight distribution make the primitive hauling theory look completely laughable to any modern industrial logistics expert. The precision of the assembly is even more baffling than the logistics of the transport. The Great Pyramid is the most accurately aligned structure on the face of the planet, oriented to true geodetic north with a margin of error of less than 1/20th of a single degree. For context, modern satellite-guided construction projects often allow for a wider margin of deviation. To achieve this level of astronomical perfection, the builders had to possess a highly sophisticated understanding of precession, celestial mechanics, and advanced geometry. They could not use a magnetic compass, because magnetic north shifts constantly and does not align with the true physical axis of the planet. They had to calculate their orientation based on precise astronomical observation over long periods. The base of the pyramid covers over 13 acres, yet the entire perimeter is perfectly level to within a fraction of an inch. If you try to level a 13-acre dirt plot using primitive string lines and water trenches, the natural curvature of the earth itself will distort your measurements. The builders of Giza somehow bypass these natural limitations completely. Inside the monument, the joints between the massive casing stones, which originally covered the exterior in polished, brilliant white limestone, are so tightly fitted that you cannot slide a modern credit card or even a human hair between them. They are bound together by a mysterious, incredibly durable mortar that has survived 5 millennia of seismic activity and intense desert heat. Modern chemical analysis has identified the ingredients of this mortar, but our material scientists are still completely unable to replicate its unique bonding strength. It is an ancient compound that cures stronger than the very stones it holds together. When we look deeper into the internal stones of the king's chamber, the evidence for advanced, ancient machines becomes undeniable. The walls and ceiling of this chamber are made of dark Aswan granite, a material so incredibly hard that it sits just below diamond on the Mohs scale of mineral hardness. To cut, face, and drill this type of rock requires immense structural force and an abrasive material harder than the granite itself, such as diamond corundum or silicon carbide. Mainstream Egyptologists assert that the workers used simple copper saws and copper chisels mixed with wet quartz sand as an abrasive. However, copper is an incredibly soft, malleable metal. If you take a copper chisel and strike a block of solid Aswan granite, the copper will instantly deform, flattening out completely while leaving barely a scratch on the stone. In recent years, independent engineers and researchers have attempted to replicate this primitive cutting method on video. The results were utterly embarrassing for the academic narrative. After hours of agonizing, back-breaking labor using copper saws and sand, researchers managed to cut only a few millimeters into the stone, while their copper tools wore down to absolute stubs. The wear and tear ratio was completely unsustainable. The project would have required more copper mining and refining than existed in the entire ancient world at that time. Where are the massive copper slag heaps that should surround Giza if millions of tools were being melted down and refashioned daily? They do not exist. Furthermore, prominent mechanical engineer Christopher Dunn has conducted extensive physical surveys inside the Giza Plateau, using industrial-grade precision straightedges, indicators, and surface gauges. What he discovered completely shatters the primitive tool theory. Dunn found that the giant granite blocks inside the king's chamber possess an almost perfect optical flatness across their entire surface, a feature that can only be achieved today using high-speed industrial surface grinders. When he examined the great granite box inside the chamber, he discovered that the internal corners were perfectly square, and the tool marks left behind showed that the cutting implement had plowed through the stone with uniform ease. Even more shocking are the drill cores found at various sites around Giza, such as the famous core number 7. When an ancient builder drilled a hole into a piece of granite, They left behind a spiral groove inside the stone. By measuring the pitch of these spiral grooves under a microscope, Dunn discovered that the drill was feeding into the hard granite at a rate of 1/10 of an inch per single revolution. This indicates an astronomical amount of downward pressure and a penetration speed that is literally hundreds of times faster than our most advanced modern diamond-tipped industrial drills. The primitive method of spinning a copper tube by hand with sand cannot produce these deep, aggressive feed rates. It would simply polish the stone smoothly and evenly. The physical markings on the Giza granite demand the existence of high-speed, mechanized, power-fed machinery operating with a cutting force that we have only recently mastered in the modern industrial age. Let us conceptualize what these engineering specifications truly mean. If you examine the exterior casing stones that remain at the base of the Great Pyramid, you'll find that each stone weighs roughly 15 tons. These stones were not merely thrown together. They were cut on an incline to perfectly match the precise 51-degree angle of the pyramid's face. To execute a three-dimensional angled cut across a 15-ton block of limestone, maintaining an accuracy of less than 1/100th of an inch across all faces, is a task that modern quarrying companies will perform using massive, computerized diamond wire saws. If a manual laborer attempts this with hand tools, the human hand will naturally drift, creating slight curves and irregularities along the surface. Yet, when you run a modern industrial straight edge down the faces of these blocks, the line is perfectly mathematically straight. The level of precision is equivalent to the optical specifications used in manufacturing high-end telescopes. To claim that this level of perfection was achieved by millions of starving, illiterate peasants swinging primitive pounding stones is a direct insult to the entire science of mechanical engineering. It represents a systematic effort by historians to sweep hard physical reality under the rug to maintain an anthropological timeline that should have been discarded decades ago. Another massive, glaring technical anomaly hidden in plain sight involves the simple logistics of indoor lighting. The internal passageways of the Great Pyramid plunge hundreds of feet deep into solid stones, twisting through narrow, steep inclines that lead to the central chambers. To construct these highly complex, multi-layered internal structures, thousands of master stonemasons and laborers had to work deep inside the dark, oxygen-deprived heart of the monument for years on end. They needed a constant, highly reliable source of bright light to maintain their extreme standards of precision. The conventional academic explanation is that they simply used traditional flax torches or oil lamps fueled by olive oil or animal fat. But this explanation faces an insurmountable physical obstacle. If you burn hundreds of traditional torches and oil lamps inside a tightly enclosed, unventilated stone tunnel for days at a time, the soot-heavy black smoke and thick carbon residue will inevitably coat the walls and ceiling, leaving behind a permanent, thick layer of black scorch marks. Yet, when early explorers first entered the pristine tunnels and chambers of the Great Pyramid, they found the white limestone and dark granite completely clean. There was absolutely zero soot residue, zero carbon accumulation, and zero smoke staining anywhere on the surfaces. Skeptics have suggested that perhaps the builders used an elaborate system of polished bronze mirrors to reflect natural sunlight from the entrance all the way down the twisting tunnels. However, optical physics completely disproves this theory. Every time light bounces off a primitive bronze mirror, it loses roughly 20 to 30% of its intensity. After just 3 or 4 reflections around the sharp angles of the pyramid's passages, the sunlight will be completely diffused, leaving the deep interior in absolute, pitch-black darkness. This complete absence of smoke residue leaves us with an incredibly provocative dilemma. How did the builders see in the dark? Did they possess a clean, wireless form of illumination, or did they construct the entire internal network under an entirely different methodology that mainstream history refuses to investigate? Let us expand the mechanical analysis to the structural mechanics of the Grand Gallery itself. The Grand Gallery is a soaring, corbel hall that slopes upward toward the King's Chamber at an angle of 26 degrees. The walls are constructed using 7 layers of overlapping limestone blocks, each layer projecting inward by roughly 3 inches to create a vaulted ceiling that rises nearly 30 feet above the floor. Mainstream Egyptologists argue that this space was designed merely to store the heavy granite plug blocks that would be slid down after the funeral to seal the tomb. However, this explanation makes no structural sense. To use a 30-foot-high architectural masterpiece constructed with millimetric tolerance as a simple storage ramp is an absurd engineering paradox. The floor of the Grand Gallery features a central groove flanked by two raised stone benches, which are spaced out with precise, rectangular slots cut into stone at regular intervals. When a mechanical engineer looks at this layout, they do not see a tomb corridor. They see a machine guide rail system. The slots show distinct operational wear marks that indicate they once held heavy moving parts or counterweights, designed to slide smoothly along the incline. If this was a dynamic system containing kinetic elements, the energy required to operate it would be immense. The sheer amount of localized physical friction generated by sliding multi-ton masses inside a confined limestone vault will require specialized lubricants or rollers that are completely absent from the archaeological record. The presence of these precision tracks indicates that the Grand Gallery served a highly complex technological purpose related to energy regulation or physical wave amplification. Rather than welcoming these rigorous engineering questions and utilizing modern scientific data to update our understanding of the past, the official institutions of Egyptology have consistently chosen a path of aggressive denial and academic suppression. At the vanguard of this defense is Dr. Zahi Hawass. For decades, Hawass has built a massive global brand as the absolute, undisputed face of Egyptian history, frequently appearing on international television networks wearing his iconic Indiana Jones-style hat. To the public, he is presented as a passionate, dedicated protector of ancient heritage. But to independent researchers, geologists, and alternative historians, he is known as an uncompromising gatekeeper who has systematically derailed careers and buried controversial data. The moment a researcher presents a theory or physical data that threatens to push the timeline of Giza back beyond the established date of 2500 BC, they are immediately met with intense professional hostility. Their excavation permits are summarily revoked. They are publicly slandered as pyramids or conspiracy theorists, and they are banned from conducting further on-site research. A famous and incredibly telling example of this defensive gatekeeping occurred during a public event where Dr. Hawass was scheduled to engage in a discussion regarding alternative archaeology. Independent researcher Graham Hancock was presenting slides detailing the advanced astronomical alignments of ancient sites, including the work of Robert Bauval. Before Hancock could even finish his presentation or engage in a meaningful dialogue, Hawass became visibly enraged, refused to look at the data, began shouting at the speaker, and abruptly stormed out of the room entirely. This was not the behavior of an objective scientist confident in his own evidence. It was the behavior of an institutional gatekeeper deeply terrified of an open, public debate. In his own writings and public statements, Hawass has proudly stated that almost everything written about the pyramids in alternative literature is completely wrong, famously declaring that no one knows the truth except me. This absolute refusal to tolerate dissenting voices has created a toxic, stagnant environment within mainstream Egyptology, where young archaeologists must blindly echo the established narrative if they want secure funding, obtain university tenures, or receive permission to work in the field. The suppression of alternative research becomes even more alarming when we examine the geological bombshell dropped on the Giza Plateau in the early 1990s. Independent Egyptologist John Anthony West noticed that the unique weathering patterns on the body of the Great Sphinx and the walls of its surrounding enclosure pit did not match the erosion seen on the nearby pyramids. The pyramids show classic signs of wind and sand erosion, which create sharp, horizontal shells across the stone blocks due to centuries of desert storms. The Sphinx, however, exhibits deeply grooved vertical, rolling, and undulating fissures. West realized that the specific profile could only be caused by one thing: intense, prolonged, torrential rainfall and massive water runoff. Recognizing that he needed expert geological validation to back up his hypothesis, West recruited Dr. Robert Schoch, a highly respected tenured professor of geology from Boston University. Schoch traveled to Giza and conducted an exhaustive, on-site physical analysis of the limestone strata. His conclusion sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Schoch confirmed that the profound weathering on the oldest parts of the Sphinx was undeniably the result of thousands of years of heavy, continuous precipitation. Here is the monumental problem that this geological fact creates for mainstream history. The Giza Plateau has been an absolute hyper-arid desert for the last 5,000 years. The last time the Sahara region experienced enough sustained, torrential rainfall and tropical downpours to cause that specific type of deep water erosion was during the transition from the late Pleistocene to the early Holocene epoch, a period known as the African Humid Period, which dates back anywhere from 9,000 to 12,000 years ago, right at the tail end of the last ice age. This means that from a standpoint of hard, empirical geological science, the Sphinx was already standing as an ancient, weathered monument long before the dynastic Egyptians even existed. When West and Schock presented their fully documented, data-driven research at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the geological community overwhelmingly agreed with their findings. But the response from mainstream Egyptologists, led by Hawass and Mark Lehner, was immediate and fierce. They completely rejected the geological data, claiming that it was impossible because there was no archaeological evidence of any advanced civilization existing 12,000 years ago. Instead of addressing the hard physical science of water erosion, they simply ignored it, hoping the theory would disappear from public consciousness. John Anthony West famously noted that an alternative researcher is an academic's worst nightmare, because they arrive with irrefutable data that completely pulls the rug out from underneath their cozy, established traditions. Rather than adapting their timeline to match the new scientific facts, the gatekeepers simply chose to protect their professional reputation at all costs. Let's look closely at how the academic world actively covers up discoveries made within the very monuments themselves. When Robert Schock conducted his subsurface seismic testing around the base of the Sphinx, he used advanced sound wave arrays to chart the subterranean density of the rock. When a rock surface is first exposed to air and water, it slowly begins to weather and degrades from the outside inward. By measuring the exact speed at which seismic sound waves pass through the limestone floors of the Sphinx enclosure, Schock could mathematically determine how deeply the rock had fractured due to environmental exposure. What the data revealed was absolutely jaw-dropping. The subsurface weathering on the front and sides of the Sphinx was incredibly deep, indicating a minimum exposure age of 9,000 to 12,000 years. However, the seismic data from the rear of the Sphinx showed that the rock was far less weathered, indicating it had been cut much later during the Old Kingdom period. This matches the alternative architectural theory perfectly. The Sphinx was originally a massive prehistoric monument that was merely restored, recarved, and cleaned out of sand by the dynastic Egyptians thousands of years later. The head of the Sphinx is visibly disproportionate to its massive body. It is far too small, which indicates that it was originally a massive lion head that had been heavily weathered by rainwater and was later carved down by a pharaoh to resemble a human face. When this data was presented, the Egyptological establishment went into full crisis mode. Dr. Zahi Hawass and his associates blocked any further seismic testing on the plateau, cutting off the project entirely. This was not done out of desire to preserve the stone. It was done because the seismic data was a mathematical execution weapon against their cherished timeline. Consider the severe financial and intellectual stakes involved in this academic gatekeeping. If the establishment ever admits that geological science takes precedence over historical speculation, the entire house of cards falls. Millions of textbooks used in universities worldwide would instantly become obsolete junk paper. Thousands of academic papers, tenure professorships, and international research grants will be completely invalidated. The historical narratives of national museums from London to Cairo would have to be completely rewritten. Mainstream archaeology operates on a system of prestige and authority. A student cannot graduate or obtain funding if they challenge the core dogma of their professors. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle of historical ignorance, where each generation of scholars simply regurgitates the unproven theories of the 19th century, completely ignoring the massive breakthroughs occurring in modern geology, engineering, and subsurface physics. The gatekeepers are not protecting the ancient history of Egypt. They are protecting their own modern livelihoods, their institutional monopolies, and their personal professional vanity. Let us look deeper into the physical mechanics of seismic wave velocity differentials. When an underground blast or mechanical strike sends a sound wave through solid, unaltered limestone, the wave travels at a uniform speed of roughly 3,000 meters per second. However, when the sound wave encounters limestone that has been structurally destabilized or structurally weakened by thousands of years of moisture penetration, the wave velocity slows down significantly to less than 1,500 meters per second. The data obtained by shock geophysicists proved that the velocity drop extended nearly 8 feet into the solid bedrock floor around the oldest portions of the Sphinx. To achieve an 8-foot deep breakdown of crystalline limestone purely through moisture absorption under desert conditions would take hundreds of thousands of years. Even under torrential rainy conditions, it demands a continuous timeline of several millennia. Mainstream Egyptologists have attempted to explain this away by claiming that the weathering was caused by modern industrial smog or salt crystallization from subsurface groundwater capillary action. But if salt crystallization was the primary culprit, the nearby 4th Dynasty tombs cut into the exact same limestone strata, which show identical deep subsurface breakdown profiles. They do not. The tombs are structurally crisp and sound, showing only superficial sand erosion. Geology does not lie. It creates an absolute mathematical barrier that prevents the standard timeline from ever being true. To extend the mystery even further, we must address a radical but mechanically sound theory proposed by Christopher Dunn in his seminal work, the Giza Power Plant. Dunn, looking at the Great Pyramid strictly through the eyes of an industrial engineer rather than a historian, realized that the physical characteristics of the monument matched the blueprint of a massive, machine-like acoustic resonator. He argues that the pyramid was built to tap into natural seismic vibrations of the Earth, a process known as piezo technology. According to this theory, the vast mass of the pyramid acts as a giant tuning fork, focusing the Earth's mechanical energy up to the Grand Gallery and into the King's Chamber. The King's Chamber itself is a marvel of acoustic engineering. The granite beams that form its ceiling are not there simply to support weight, but are deliberately tuned to resonate at a specific harmonic frequency. Dunn points out that the granite contains high amounts of quartz crystals. When quartz is subjected to intense mechanical stress or vibration, it generates a physical phenomenon known as a piezoelectric effect, producing a direct stream of electrical energy. To support this staggering claim, Dunn analyzes the strange chemical residues found inside the Queen's Chamber shafts. When early explorers scraped the walls of these narrow tunnels, they did not find typical dust or soot. Instead, they discovered a thick coating of salt and chemical compounds, including zinc chloride and hydrochloric acid. In a modern industrial context, these specific chemicals are used to fuel a specialized type of chemical reactor. Dunn suggests that chemicals were fed down the northern and southern shafts of the Queen's Chamber, mixing to produce hydrogen gas. This hydrogen gas would then fill the internal chambers of the pyramid, acting as a highly efficient medium to conduct and amplify the acoustic energy being generated by the Earth's vibrations. This energy would be directed into the King's Chamber, where it would strike the quartz-heavy granite blocks, converting the mechanical sound waves into a highly focused, clean stream of microwave or electromagnetic energy. This energy could have been transmitted wirelessly to the surrounding plateau, providing clean power for a civilization that possessed a form of technology we are only now beginning to conceptualize. Mainstream Egyptology completely ridicules this power plant theory, claiming it belongs in a science fiction novel. But they have yet to provide a single alternative engineering explanation for why the internal shafts were coated in those specific chemical compounds, or why the King's Chamber granite was systematically tuned to precise acoustic harmonics. If the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid are indeed ancient machines far older than we're being told, the question then turns to what lies hidden directly beneath them. For generations, rumors and ancient legends have persisted about a vast, interconnected network of subterranean tunnels, deep chambers, and a mythical hall of records buried deep within the Giza bedrock. Mainstream archaeology has consistently dismissed these stories as pure fantasy. However, the physical exploration of the pyramid's interior has revealed a series of highly enigmatic, sealed spaces that suggest a deliberate attempt to keep certain discoveries hidden. In the early 1990s, a German engineer and robotics expert named Rudolf Gantenbrink was hired to install a modern ventilation system inside the Great Pyramid. While working in the Queen's Chamber, he turned his attention to two incredibly narrow shafts, measuring just 8 by 8 inches wide, that shoot upward at steep angles through the solid stone walls. For over a century, Orthodox Egyptologists had completely dismissed these shafts as simple, symbolic air vents that led directly to the exterior of the monument. Gantenbrink designed a highly sophisticated, miniature-tracked robot named UpYou-Out-2, equipped with a high-resolution camera and lights, to explore these tight spaces. As the world watched the remote video feed, the little robot crawled hundreds of feet up the dark, sloping shaft. Suddenly, it came to an abrupt halt. The shaft did not lead to the outside world. Instead, the robot was staring directly at a perfectly fitted, highly polished limestone slab that completely blocked the tunnel. Even more shocking was the presence of two small, elegant copper loops or handles attached to the stone. This discovery completely captivated the global public. Metal of any kind had never been found inside the structural fabric of the old kingdom pyramids. The presence of copper fittings strongly implied that this door was designed to be opened, or that it served as a highly secure seal protecting something of immense value. Gantenbrink was poised to modify his robot to see what lay beyond the door, but instead of authorizing immediate further exploration, the Egyptian authorities suddenly stepped in. Gantenbrink's permit was abruptly canceled. His team was effectively dismissed from the site, and the entire project was shut down without any clear scientific justification. For nearly a decade, a complete media blackout surrounded the mysterious door. It wasn't until 2002 that another robot, heavily sponsored by National Geographic and managed under the strict supervision of Dr. Zihawas, was finally sent back up the shaft. In a highly sensationalized live television broadcast, the new robot drilled a tiny hole through Gantenbrink's door and pushed a fiber optic camera through the gap. The imagery that returned was mind-boggling. The camera revealed a small, empty, highly polished chamber, and directly at the back of it sat a second, completely sealed limestone door. Rather than immediately continuing the exploration to break through the second barrier, the live broadcast was quickly concluded. To this day, over 20 years later, no further official exploration of that second door has ever been permitted. Every request from international universities and independent scientific institutions to send advanced cameras behind that second seal has been flatly denied by the gatekeepers, who cite vague concerns about structural safety. The mystery of hidden voids inside the Great Pyramid reached an absolute fever pitch in 2017, thanks to an international collective of elite physicists and engineers known as the Scan Pyramids Project. Utilizing a revolutionary, non-invasive technology called muon radiography, the team managed to peer through the immense, solid stone mass of the monument without moving a single block. Muons are high-energy subatomic particles that are naturally created when cosmic rays collide with the Earth's upper atmosphere. These particles rain down across the planet non-stop, easily passing through solid matter. However, as they travel through incredibly dense materials like solid stone, they slowly lose energy and scatter. By placing highly sensitive chemical emulsion plates and electronic detectors inside the lower chambers of the Great Pyramid, the physicists could map the exact density of the monument above them. If there's an unknown, empty space inside the pyramid, more muons will pass through that specific zone unharmed, creating a distinct hotspot on the data map. After months of rigorous data collection and cross-verification by elite laboratories in France, Japan, and Egypt, the results were published in prestigious scientific journal Nature. The scans revealed the existence of a truly colossal, completely unknown hidden void located directly above the Grand Gallery. This massive space, dubbed the Big Void, is estimated to be at least 100 feet long and stands as one of the most monumental structural discoveries inside the pyramid in over 4 centuries. The chamber is entirely sealed, with no visible entrance points connecting it to the known internal passageway system. The global scientific community was ecstatic, calling for immediate, low-impact exploration using tiny fiber optic drills or micro-drones. But once again, the institutional response from the gatekeepers of Egyptology was highly defensive. Dr. Zihawas immediately downplayed the discovery in international news outlets, publicly stating that it wasn't a real chamber, but rather just a random gap left behind by the original builders as a structural weight relief zone. He flatly refused to grant permission for any physical exploration of the Big Void. This absolute dismissal flies directly in the face of engineering logic. The builders of the Great Pyramid never left random, sloppy gaps inside their monuments. Every single internal space is finished with absolute mathematical perfection. Why block the world from looking inside a 100-foot chamber? What are they deeply afraid we will find? To further expand the horizon of hidden secrets, we must examine the mysterious anomalies discovered deep beneath the Great Sphinx itself. In the late 20th century, seismic testing and ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by independent groups, including the Stanford Research Institute, revealed the undeniable presence of large, rectangular, man-made cavities buried deep in the bedrock directly underneath the front paws of the Sphinx. These underground chambers sit roughly 25 feet below the surface and exhibit perfectly straight, geometric walls that could not have been formed by natural geological fracturing. Many independent scholars believe these voids represent the entry points to the long-lost Hall of Records, an ancient repository of prehistoric knowledge containing the advanced science, metallurgy, and history of the civilization that constructed the Giza complex before the Great Flood. Rumors have leaked out from alternative excavation sources at small scale. Secret drilling operations were conducted under the cover of night by selective institutional actors. Reports suggest that a deep vertical shaft was cleared out behind the Sphinx's tail, leading down to a subterranean water-filled chamber system. Yet, whenever the public or independent journalists ask for official documentation or live camera access to these subterranean zones, Dr. Hawass and the Supreme Council of Antiquities flatly deny that any chambers exist unopposed, writing them off as simple natural anomalies or water-carved cavities. This extreme defensiveness only adds fuel to the fire. If there is truly nothing down there but natural rock, why not allow an open international scientific team to live stream a robotic exploration and settle the debate once and for all? To find clues about the identity and technological capabilities of these original prehistoric builders, we must look beyond the standard internal chambers and examine two other highly anomalous sites located nearby: the mysterious Osirian temple at Abydos and the massive subterranean Serapeum at Saqqara. The Osirian is situated directly behind the Temple of Seti I, but it sits at a significantly lower depth, completely buried in the groundwater table. It is constructed from colossal megalithic blocks of solid red granite that weigh up to 100 tons each. The architectural style of the Osirian features no inscriptions, no hieroglyphs, and no artistic decorations. Instead, it is characterized by an absolute, monumental minimalism that perfectly matches the interior of the Great Pyramid. Mainstream archaeology claims that the New Kingdom pharaoh Seti built the Osirian as a symbolic cenotaph. However, when you look closely at engineering, it becomes glaringly obvious that Seti built his own traditional temple on top of a pre-existing, incredibly ancient megalithic structure that he had unearthed during his reign. The massive granite blocks are perfectly squared and fitted together with absolute precision, utilizing complex interlocking joints that are completely absent from standard New Kingdom architecture. The temple had to be excavated out of deep layers of ancient silt, indicating that it had been submerged under heavy floods thousands of years before the first dynasty ever unified Egypt. An even more profound display of impossible ancient manufacturing can be found inside the dark, rock-cut tunnels of the Serapeum of Saqqara. Located deep underground, this complex consists of a massive network of galleries that house 24 colossal, ultra-smooth black diorite in granite boxes. Each individual box weighs over 60 to 70 tons, and their perfectly fitted lids add another 20 to 30 tons of pressure on top. The orthodox narrative insists that these boxes were constructed during the late period to serve as burial coffins for sacred Apis bulls. But this explanation is completely absurd from a mechanical engineering perspective. Diorite is one of the hardest stones on the planet, so incredibly difficult to work that modern master stonemasons require heavy computer-guided diamond saws and automated polishers to shape it without cracking. Yet, the interior corners of the Serapeum boxes are cut to a perfect 90-degree angle with absolute mathematical precision. If you take an industrial square and place it against the inside surfaces, there is zero light leakage across the entire length of the stone. The surfaces are polished down to an absolute mirror finish, achieving an optical flatness that defies manual craftsmanship. Furthermore, the tunnels leading down into the Serapeum are incredibly narrow and cramped, leaving barely enough room for a few human bodies to stand side by side. How did ancient people manually transport a 90-ton solid stone block down into a dark, suffocating subterranean tunnel, maneuvered around sharp 90-degree corners, and drop it perfectly into a deep recessed pit without the aid of heavy hydraulic machinery or overhead cranes? The physical space simply does not allow for the hundreds of men required to pull a traditional rope sledge. The Serapeum boxes, much like the precision granite inside the Great Pyramid, stand as undeniable physical proof of a highly advanced, lost technological civilization that operated in the Nile Valley long before the arrival of the dynastic pharaohs. This brings us to the profound alternative theory that mainstream academia has spent decades trying to actively discredit and ignore: the Orion correlation theory, originally formulated by independent researcher and engineer Robert Bauval. In the late 1980s, Bauval noticed a highly specific, striking pattern when analyzing aerial photographs of the Giza Plateau. The three primary pyramids, the Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafre, and the smaller Pyramid of Menkaure, are not arranged in a perfectly straight, symmetrical line. While the two larger pyramids line up accurately along a diagonal axis, the third, smaller pyramid is distinctly offset to the left. Bauval realized that the specific layout perfectly mirrored the physical alignment of the three bright stars that make up the constellation of Orion's belt: Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. Furthermore, the relative size and brightness of stars matched the physical scale of the monuments on the ground. The two larger stars corresponded to the two massive pyramids, while the smaller, dimmer star corresponded to the offset, smaller monument of Menkaure. To verify if this correlation was a deliberate architectural plan, Bauval utilized advanced astronomical computer software to reconstruct the exact positions of the night sky across different historical eras. Because of a slow cyclical wobble in the Earth's rotational axis known as a precession of the equinoxes, the exact position and angle of the stars shift gradually over a vast 26,000-year cycle. When Bauval ran the calculations for the traditional academic date of 2500 BC, the alignment between the pyramids and Orion's belt was close, but it was not a perfect, precise match. However, when he rewound the celestial clock back to the year 10,500 BC, something extraordinary happened. At that exact date, the alignment between the three monuments on the ground and the three stars of Orion's belt achieved an absolute, flawless, one-to-one astronomical correlation. At that same moment, the Great Sphinx, which faces directly due east, was looking straight at the rising constellation of Leo on the morning of the vernal equinox. The entire Giza Plateau was revealed to be a massive, interconnected, highly sophisticated terrestrial map of the heavens, permanently freezing a specific cosmic date into the solid stone of the Earth. The year 10,500 BC marks the exact end of the last ice age and corresponds perfectly with the independent geological rainfall data discovered by Dr. Robert Schoch on the body of the Sphinx. Why would the builders go to such immense lengths to permanently encode the specific prehistoric date into the bedrock of Giza? Were they leaving behind an absolute, unerasable cosmic time capsule to signal the exact era when their magnificent global civilization was systematically destroyed by a monumental planetary catastrophe? The concept of a highly advanced global civilization being wiped from the historical record by a sudden, devastating planetary event is no longer just a radical fringe theory. It is increasingly backed by cutting-edge empirical science. Popularized by independent researcher Graham Hancock, this perspective points to a massive wealth of anomalous archaeological sites worldwide that completely shatter the standard linear model of human progress. The most explosive example is the ancient temple complex of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. Discovered in the mid-1990s by German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, Göbekli Tepe consists of a series of massive, highly complex stone rings housing giant, beautifully carved T-shaped pillars that weigh up to 20 tons each. The stones are deeply carved with highly stylized artistic reliefs of wild animals, abstract humanoid figures, and complex cosmic symbols. Through rigorous, universally accepted radiocarbon dating of the surrounding organic soil layers, scientists have definitively proven that Göbekli Tepe was constructed at least 12,000 years ago, making it thousands of years older than the oldest verified cities of Mesopotamia, Stonehenge, or the official date of the Egyptian pyramids. The existence of Göbekli Tepe completely rewrites the entire textbook understanding of human development. According to the traditional academic model, human beings 12,000 years ago were nothing but primitive, nomadic hunter-gatherers who spent 24 hours a day simply trying to survive. We were told that agriculture had to be developed first, allowing humans to settle down in permanent villages, create a surplus of food, and eventually specialize into social classes, architects, and stonemasons. But Göbekli Tepe proves the exact opposite occurred. A highly sophisticated, deeply organized, mathematically capable society assembled a monumental stone temple complex long before the widespread adoption of agriculture or permanent farming villages. The sheer organizational force required to bring hundreds of workers together, quarry 20-ton stones, transport them up a steep hill, and carve them with absolute precision demands the existence of a highly advanced, mature culture. Graham Hancock argues that Göbekli Tepe was not a site where civilization spontaneously began, but rather a specialized knowledge transfer center built by the highly educated survivors of an advanced, global maritime empire that had been utterly devastated by a series of catastrophic cosmic impacts, an event known to modern geologists as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Around 12,800 years ago, a massive fragmented comet struck the Laurentide ice sheet of North America, triggering instantaneous, apocalyptic global flooding, massive climate shifts, and absolute mass extinction event that wiped out the megafauna of the planet. The advanced global civilization that existed before this event was completely obliterated, leaving behind only scattered fragments of their highly advanced mathematical, astronomical, and architectural knowledge. These surviving fragments were carefully passed down to early hunter-gatherer populations worldwide, explaining why complex civilizations like ancient Egypt and early Sumer appear to emerge onto the historical stage suddenly, fully formed, and highly sophisticated, without any traceable period of primitive development. To analyze the technical mechanics of the hydrogen gas microwave generation further, we must evaluate the physical properties of the materials used in the king's chamber ceiling. Suspended above the chamber are 9 massive granite beams, weighing up to 70 tons each, arranged in 5 distinct, vertical layers separated by narrow air spaces. Mainstream Egyptologists label these spaces relieving chambers, built to protect the flat ceiling of the room from collapsing under the immense weight of the solid limestone masonry above. However, from a structural engineering perspective, a simple pointed gable roof, like the one found directly over the Queen's chamber, would have easily diverted the overhead structural weight outward into the core masonry without requiring thousands of tons of imported Aswan granite. These granite beams were placed there for an entirely non-structural, vibratory reason. Each beam was deliberately cut, chipped, and tuned on its underside to act as an independent acoustic bridge. When the Earth's seismic waves passed up to the core of the monument, these beams would begin to oscillate in perfect harmony, working like an industrial-scale transducer. The intense mechanical vibration would strike the high concentration of quartz crystals within the granite matrix, creating a continuous, high-amplitude piezoelectric charge that transformed the entire room into a high-frequency electromagnetic field. The hydrogen gas filling the chamber would become ionized, forming a dense plasma layer that emitted directional microwave radiation out to the northern and southern star shafts. This is not a tomb. It is an industrial power generation apparatus whose blueprint has been completely misinterpreted by a modern academic establishment, completely blind to the laws of physical mechanics. To make the historical suppression even more glaring, let us look at the geopolitical and financial mechanisms that keep this lie alive. Egypt's tourism industry is a multi-billion-dollar economic engine that keeps the modern nation afloat. The entire global marketing strategy for this industry relies on the highly romanticized narrative of the pharaohs. If the Ministry of Antiquity suddenly admitted that the crown jewels of their tourism industry, the Giza pyramids and the Sphinx, were inherited from a separate, prehistoric, technologically advanced global civilization, international prestige and narrative control would shift instantly. The funding networks would change. Academic institutions that have spent the last 100 years printing millions of textbooks and granting PhDs based on the Bronze Age theory would face complete intellectual bankruptcy. If you are a tenured professor at Oxford or Harvard, and you have spent 40 years teaching your students that copper chisels built the Great Pyramid, your entire career, your books, your reputation, and your professional authority will be destroyed overnight if the engineering data were accepted. Therefore, it is far easier, safer, and more financially lucrative for these institutions to form a united front, aggressively debunking and silencing any alternative scientific research that threatens their comfortable status quo. When we take all these undeniable physical facts together, the complete absence of contemporary inscriptions linking Khufu to construction, the absolute lack of a royal mummy or funerary art inside the monument, the stunning testimony of the inventory stela, the staggering mathematical and astronomical alignments that match the night sky of 10,500 BC, the profound water erosion pathways on the body of the Sphinx, the microscopic precision feed marks on the hard Aswan, granite, the chemical residues indicating ancient technological functionality, the hidden 100-foot void sealed behind heavy stone doors, and the global context of 12,000-year-old megalithic sites like Göbekli Tepe. We are forced to completely reject the simple, comfortable story we have been taught since childhood. The Great Pyramid of Giza was not a tomb. It was not constructed by primitive Bronze Age farmers using copper hand tools, and its true history stretches back thousands of years into a forgotten, highly advanced epic of the human story. Standing at the brink of these profound mysteries, we must ask ourselves, how long can the gatekeepers maintain their iron grip on history? With modern scanning technologies advancing at a blinding pace and independent researchers operating across global decentralized networks, the truth cannot be kept buried forever. The stone monument of the Giza Plateau has survived cataclysmic ice ages, massive global floods, and the rise and fall of countless human empires. They stand as a silent, unyielding monument to a technological capability we are only now beginning to comprehend. It is time to tear down the academic Iron Curtain, confront the gatekeepers of history, and demand genuine transparency for the collective heritage of humans. Because sometimes, history's greatest secrets are not lost at all. They are simply buried in plain sight by those who prefer that you never think to ask questions that could rewrite absolutely everything. The choices we make today, and the courage we show in seeking the truth behind these ancient stone walls, will determine whether we finally discover our true past, or remain forever trapped in a curated matrix of historical amnesia. The answers are waiting directly beneath the sands, locked behind doors that are begging to be opened. Stay vigilant. Question everything you've been taught, and join us as we continue to tear away the mask of mainstream archaeology to reveal the true, forgotten majesty of our collective human story.